Aloha, I'm Dan, and welcome back to Breathing Underwater's Musicast. So now that I've resurrected this podcast after almost a decade of inactivity, I don't really have a singular plan or agenda for how I want things to go. I just want to keep it alive and have it have a home so I can have a place to put this kind of stuff, music-related stuff, when it comes up or when I'm inspired. So the big thing, the past couple of years, you might have heard about this little pandemic that has been going on. Yeah, that really affected music and music going and concerts and streaming and music consumption, and just affected, all of these things. Right before the pandemic, my wife and I had tickets to acts like Kesha, Deftones, Incubus, Dave Matthews Band. And we, had to either get refunds or reschedule, or hopefully, those shows would be rescheduled, which some of them were and some of them weren't. At that point, everything that was normal just wasn't normal anymore. And a big normal for us was going to shows, something that she and I, really connected over right away, and something that we continue to. For my part, though, since I stopped making the podcast in like 2013, I think, and going to concerts was a regular theme of that original run, because that was just a big part of my identity and my activities, and my passion and interest level was not only playing music, but, attending music, or vice versa, because going to live music events inspired me to, want to be part of that and make my own. And that started as a middle schooler. So it was just kind of like a matter of routine for me and my brother and my friends growing up to just like go to as many shows as possible, local, national. And I tried to keep that alive and a part of myself as much as I could, even after I had a young child, and, life changed in a lot of ways, and made it a lot harder to do that kind of stuff regularly, but it was still important to me. But then something happened. I think I mentioned on one of the last episodes of the podcast back in its first iteration, I mentioned going to a Soulfly show in Springfield, Virginia, I think. And it was really kind of depressing, unfortunately, but honestly. And I'd seen a pattern kind of leading up to that. And it was something that Dave, my brother, and I touched on in the podcast in the past. Was what we were seeing back then, I think, was what we're experiencing now for sure, is that rock and metal are not mainstream genres, really, or even like what's considered rock now isn't what was considered, rock back then. So growing up, and even through like the early to mid 2000s, I was just used to going to shows of popular bands and artists that were well attended and had a really good, like, passionate energy. It was just kind of expected. But I guess it's a mixture of me growing older and the kind of shows that I was going to, because those bands were getting older and their audiences were generally getting older and maybe kind of more out of fashion and, more niche. But by the time I got to that Soulfly show in like 2012, I think, I realized that the money and the time and the effort that it took to get to a show to see something so unfortunately lackluster. And I don't necessarily blame the artists alone. I think it's a mixture of factors, like I've already said. But I honestly kind of lost the original passion that I had to go to rock shows, just as a matter of principle, because they honestly just started to feel less and less like they were worth the investment of time and money. And I know that makes me sound like an old curmudgeon, and I guess that's just part of growing older and everything, but I never wanted to believe that would be true. I always wanted to think that I could be young and passionate about music at heart, and that my experiences with it would remain the same. But I guess that's just the nature of life and growing up and getting older, is that things change, things evolve. I haven't lost my passion for music. I still play in multiple bands and I'm having the most fun that I've ever had. But in the past several years, I really haven't been rushing out to go see, there's a band coming through. If it's not on a Friday night and the tickets aren't reasonable, I'm more than likely going to give it more than a second thought and probably not put a lot of effort into it, unless there's a other reason to go, like I have friends going or something like that. But I really have to give props to my wife, because a couple of years ago, she really reignited my passion for live music in general, because she's so passionate about it, and it reminded me of how much it meant to me. And moving forward, we decided that we were going to start going to shows, a lot more shows. So like I said, spring 2020 was a catastrophe because of all the money and logistics that we had invested into this like summer lineup of shows that we were going to go to, and then it all came crashing down. But even though things haven't gotten back to, so-called normal and like the way that any of us really want them to, bands did start touring again. And 2021, I got to say, was like the best year that I've had going to concerts in many years, way preceding the pandemic. So I'm going to talk about the shows that I went to, both just my own thoughts and reactions, but then I have a couple other joint attendees that I thought would have a good perspective on things, so it's not just me. And one of those is my kid, because I'm finally at that point now where my kids are old enough to have developed an interest in things on their own, and they're old enough to start going to shows and experiencing that whole landscape for themselves. So it's kind of is what I expected, honestly, when I first became a parent. Was I knew that the younger years of a kid's life would be a lot more insulated, but as they got older and they started developing their own individual personalities and interests and identities, that I would be curious and interested to help them, support them, experience that stuff with them like my parents did in their way. And I wanted to pay that forward with them too, and hopefully not just take them to shows, but also be interested in the kind of music that they would, or at least be open to the kind of music that they are getting into. So there is definitely some crossover, but we'll talk about that more down the line. For now, the first show that I went to with my wife and some friends, the first show that I had been to, I think the last show that I had been to before everything shut down, it was Not Fest, so it was like Slipknot and Gojira and whoever else played that year. That would have been fall 2019 in the Jiffy Lube Pavilion at, I almost wanted to say Nissan Pavilion, because that's what it was when I was growing up and going to Ozfest and stuff there. But it was the Jiffy Lube Pavilion in Bristow, Virginia. And that was great. That was great seeing Slipknot again. I hadn't seen Slipknot in like a decade. They were definitely like still at the top of their game. They brought it. But that was like the last show that I went to until last spring, 2021. So I don't have all the tickets and dates in front of me, but I think this was like late spring, probably late May maybe. I saw Sublime and the Dirty Heads, which is kind of ironic. So that was 2021. So in late 2010, maybe early 2011, I don't remember exactly, but I saw that same lineup. It was Sublime, Dirty Heads. This is Sublime with Rome, by the way, of course. I first saw that same lineup in Maui at the Maui Arts and Cultural Center in their big outdoor like pavilion area. And let me tell you, there is definitely a unique vibe to a reggae punk hip hop show in Hawaii that you're just not going to get on the mainland. However, the one last spring was still an awesome show, and it was such a great like reintroduction to going to live shows again, because it was outdoor in like a field. It was over by Kings Dominion in Virginia, and even though there were a lot of people there, it was good to see that both groups are still a big draw. We were able to spread out, because it was still early vaccination season and stuff like that. And, it was a really great time. Seeing Sublime play a lot of their hits and things, is just never gets old. Like, especially when you have a crowd of people that also love and adore that music. It reminds me of experiences that I've had at like Ozfests and things like that. You're in like an amphitheater or a stadium, and there's thousands of people all singing the same songs and have their like phones or lighters up or whatever. That kind of like communal spiritual energy is just undeniably like awesome. I love that sense of like community and togetherness that can come with an experience like that. But Sublime played first while it was still light out, and then Dirty Heads played. So I guess I don't know if it was like a co-headlining tour or if it was really Dirty Heads headlining. Maybe they did like rotating slots or something. I don't know. But at our show, Sublime played first, and then Dirty Heads at night, and they were awesome. Like I've heard them over the years, and I saw them 10 years ago on Maui, but I never really like listened to their stuff apart from that. I never really got into them. I don't really know why. because I've like really got into them lately, and they are I've really been missing out. Like they're so much fun, and there's such a great like fusion of different styles of music, and I like how they are pretty chill, and they don't, unlike Sublime, who integrates like punk rock and reggae, and Sublime can have a much more of like a punk edge. The Dirty Heads doesn't really have that same kind of rock edge, but they still do have a bit of an edge, and it comes through a lot in their hip hop too. But I like that about them. They're very unique, and they just put on like a great show, very like big and fun, and you could tell everybody was loving it. If I have my order correct, the next one was Dave Matthews Band. So this is my wife's favorite band, and I obviously know about them and heard about them growing up. I listened to some of their stuff, but I never really got it. Didn't really speak to me. I've known some very fervent fans throughout the years. And then when I moved to Richmond, Virginia, obviously I heard about them a lot because they're from Charlottesville, Virginia. So they've always kind of been on my radar. I just never really knew what to make of them. I guess I had a hard time like compartmentalizing them or categorizing them. Even though I couldn't quite figure out their genre, the style of music and their sound in general really, didn't fit into my like pantheon of stuff in general that I usually gravitate towards. So I just never really pay them a lot of mind. But obviously, since my wife's favorite band, she listens to them a lot. And even then, hearing their recordings or hearing their live recordings, because we have them on the Sirius XM channel, still, I was still learning to start appreciate like their musicianship and their songwriting and everything. But still, the music I didn't quite get. I can't think of another way to say it. I just didn't really like understand what I was listening to in terms of like what it was, I don't know, expressing or why it was the way it was. But so we went to go see them in Virginia Beach early last summer at the big amphitheater up there, whatever it's called. And I can honestly and truly admit that I was pretty blown away. Like I now see why they're one of those bands that people follow on the road a lot, and that they have this like live culture, like where people get their merch, like at shows that isn't available at other shows, and then sells out really quick and stuff like that, because they really are like a really unique kind of experience and a unique sound that really I can't categorize. But obviously I can see like what a lot of their influences are and a lot of the different pieces, but their musicianship is just off the charts. Like I don't know how a lot of these like kind of more jam bands, because I've seen bands like jam before and you can see them kind of playing off each other, very jazz like kind of stuff. But Dave's band they're so tight, and seeing them live and watching them, I assume that a lot of them will be like looking at each other and waiting for cues, and and kind of doing a lot of that that more like in the moment kind of musical communication. But a lot of them, like the brass players and the electric guitar player, even the drummer, like they were really kind of they seemed like they were in their own little zone. They didn't really seem like they were really interacting that much in terms of like their communication. But I do know that they play, and I've heard a lot of their live recordings, on the Sirius XM channel, they don't play songs the same hardly ever. So for them to be like that tight and that calculated and that oriented at all times, I heard like zero mistakes or flubs or anything the whole show. It's like all of their jamming was rehearsed, and I think it's just a testament to like how not just individually what amazing musicians they are, but also like as a collective, like they really know each other, and I think that's just phenomenal. But their sound there were all those instruments, it just doesn't come across to me the same way, and that's true with a lot of bands when the live experience is just, you can't capture it in a recording. Some bands just are better live, and I think Dave Matthews is just one of those bands you really can't truly get them until you see them live and get that sonic experience, because that was what really brought me from indifference, I'd say, to like active interest in them and what they do and how they do it, was that live show. So that was really something. Like some of the things I was really interested in too was like the mixing live. The electric guitar, for instance, was like really low in the mix, sometimes almost like unintelligible. And then when he would have like a solo, it still wouldn't be that loud. But the vocals were very prominent, and the percussion was very prominent, and the brass and the keys were. So I was really interested like in how because I discovered them originally in middle school because they were on alternative rock radio with songs like Crash and Too Much, and I just assumed that they were kind of like an alt rock band. I can see why rock radio and stuff back in the 90s was trying to pick up anything they considered alternative, even bands that weren't, like in my opinion stuff like Counting Crows or Blues Travelers didn't really have a real place on like alt rock radio, but whatever. And Dave Matthews was one of those to me, but whatever. But I was always just curious to see like if they were like a rock band. And I really wouldn't say that they are, especially because of how, even though like they had a lot of rock instrumentation and influences, they did not have a rock sound. I would say they were much more of like a jazzy, bluesy, folksy fusion something, but their song structure and their sound was not one of rock to me. So I just kind of found that interesting because I was always curious as a kid, like why they were lumped in with that alt rock scene, at least on like radio and MTV and stuff. But I really don't think that they ever did that intentionally. And you can tell now that, I mean, they're as popular as ever, it seems, because it was a very well attended show. And I applaud them for doing their own thing and being true to themselves and not, feeling that they needed to appease that rock crowd, because I don't think that's what they are and what they ever wanted to be. So good for them. And I really look forward to seeing them again. Next up was a great throwback show, Ludacris. So this one we went to mostly, Ludacris, I'm sure, is always a good time. I never saw him live. And as a matter of fact, I would say I'm pretty sure that Ludacris was my first full-on hip-hop show. I've never been to like a rap or hip-hop show before, I'm pretty sure. I've been to, a lot of like rap metal back in the day, but not just hip-hop. So I didn't really know what to expect, But my middle son is a big Fast and Furious fan and also a big hip-hop fan. So he knows Ludacris from both of those realms. And we surprised him with tickets, and he was overjoyed beforehand. And then I think his brain exploded when we actually went, because it was his first like big show. So his Ludacris was kind of like my Weird Al in 1996 or something like that. First national touring act with a big crowd of people that he got to go to. So for my part, it was a really great time. Ludacris was so charismatic. I mean, even when he was just talking and goofing around and telling stories and kind of like hyping up a song, like telling a little anecdote that would lead into a lyric of the song and stuff like that. He was just like captivating the whole time. He was funny. He was fun. I don't think I've ever been to a show where the artist took themselves seriously. Like you could tell, Ludacris is definitely a performer. Like that's why I think he works so well in those like Fast and Furious kind of, tongue-in-cheek movies, because he's really self-aware and he's just very like charismatic, like I said, but he really knows how to like perform, whether it's on a stage or in front of a camera. He knows how to like capture or get people's attention. He's just very cheeky and like winky, and he would say a lot of stuff about it, almost like this persona as he would lead into a song that was definitely not the kind of stuff that you would expect from like a married father, but it's it's definitely like his like Ludacris like staged persona and stuff like that. So it was all really kind of like in good fun and and great energy from the crowd. It was definitely a little bit of an older crowd. I definitely saw people with their kids there like ours, because I'm sure like Fast and Furious and stuff has kept his music career going too. But I'd say it was definitely more of my generation, a nostalgia kind of thing, or just true fan base for sure. But it was great. It sounded great, even though it was all DJ music. Actually, I take it back, because I did see, even though I wouldn't say it was a hip hop show, but I saw Lil Wayne open for Blink-182 a couple years ago in Virginia Beach, and he had full live instrumentation with a DJ too. But he had guitar, drums, bass, and stuff. And he was, I don't want to be mean, but his band was way more talented than him. He's definitely was more of a performer than anyway. But this Ludacris, like I said, was my first like actual full-on hip hop show. And unlike Lil Wayne, he had just a DJ, no live instrumentation. Still sounded great. Really was like a commanding full music experience. I was wondering about that, because I hadn't been to a lot of like, I don't know, EDM or DJ shows or like I said, hip hop shows. So most of the stuff that I've seen over the years has been with live instruments. So I was curious about how that kind of backtrack thing would work. And one interesting thing about it was how he was able to do like kind of lead into stuff, or like step away and the DJ would do some things. And like there was one medley of it wasn't even Ludacris stuff. He did like everything from all this like 90s and 2000 hit medley, like from like, I don't know, Britney Spears to Nirvana. And it was kind of cool. Like they were paying respect to all these different genres, and they were just almost like karaokeing the music, but people were loving it. People were going crazy, and then Ludacris would come out and do like choruses of a couple of the songs, and then he did a lot of medleys too. Actually, that was another thing that stood out to me about the way he handled a lot of his stuff, was he was able to cram in a lot of material, because I don't think he played a full song at all, if I remember correctly. He played most of his songs were like an intro, verse, and chorus, or maybe a repeated chorus, but I don't think he actually played through a full song at any point. So the whole show was almost more like a medley, which might sound kind of annoying, because like if you go to see an artist, you want to hear them play songs. But come to think of it, like I can think of a lot of bands that I've seen that have only played for 45 minutes, an hour, and they've only played, maybe like an album's worth of material. But if they have several albums, or like a bunch of albums out over a series of years and decades, you really want to hear like a good range of stuff. Like, I don't know, seeing Korn now or something, they have so many albums. It's like, how could they potentially play half that stuff that you want to hear? Even like back when I saw Silverchair on their last tour in like 2007, it was really disappointing to me, even though I grew to like their last album a lot, but that's all they played. And then I think they played like 2 or 3 songs from their previous, from their previous library. And that was just really disappointing, because even as great as they were live, I didn't just go to see them live. I think a lot of people would agree. I know some people go to shows with an open mind and will take whatever they get. But as a ticket paying fan, I want to at least have some nostalgia itch scratched. I want to see some stuff that I love, even if it's not exactly the songs that I would have played. I want to see something. So it sucks when like bands, they're like, oh, we only want to play our new stuff, we're tired of playing our old stuff. And that's what came across with like Silverchair. I totally get that Daniel Johns doesn't want to play stuff that he wrote when he was 14. I understand that. But as an audience member, I also feel like there is a certain obligation, and I get it from both sides. Like if I was like James Hetfield and Kirk Hammett and Lars, I would not want to play Enter Sandman ever again in my entire life. And I've mentioned that in a previous podcast episode about songs that are just done. But to completely ignore like years or decades worth of material in favor of only the new stuff that you're passionate about playing as a live performer is, I don't know, it's a slippery slope to me. And that's why I think Ludacris did it really well, because he scratched that itch. He gave you that taste of stuff that you really wanted to hear, but then he moved it right along and he kept things going. And he was able to cram in a ton more material than he would have if he had played his full 2 to 4 minute songs. So we'll hear my son Soren's take in a second about this show, but another show that he went to not too long after last summer was Glass Animals. And this is a band that I discovered through my family. They were into it through the Alt Nation channel on Sirius XM. I guess they've been around longer than I realized. I thought they were a much newer band, but I think they've been around for like maybe almost a decade, and they're UK based, I believe. And they're very much like a pop alt. I don't know if I would call them a rock band personally, but much more like that modern, what people think of like rock, which is more like synth driven and percussion driven. And the melodies are more centralized around the vocals than they are the instruments. And seeing them live, I can attest to that, because the singer had a guitar, and I'd say played it maybe 30% of the time that he actually had it. Most of the time it seemed like it was more of a prop. But anyway, they were great. I've never been, just like hip hop, I don't think I've ever been to a full-on pop show before. And that's what I would categorize this more as pop than rock. But I know there's crossover, but this was definitely the most well attended. It had to have been sold out. It was at the amphitheater here in Richmond, Virginia, the Virginia Raceway. I think it's called the Virginia Credit Union Live Amphitheater. So it's one of those typical kind of outdoor open amphitheaters, but it's covered. And then there's like a lawn area in the back, and it was packed. We were able to find some seats though that weren't close to other people. We were able to get a good eye line on the stage without being crowded in with other people, and it was great. Took the son and the daughter to this show, and it was great getting to experience more than one big concert with them last summer. Glass Animals was a lot of fun. They had a great stage setup. It was like a summertime, very like, I don't know, 80s pixel art kind of stuff. They had a big screen that had like an old Windows 95 kind of interface going on, and their stage was meant to look like a pool, and the singer would get up on this diving board, and they had palm trees and things. So it was a really good like kind of like atmosphere and stuff. And then they were just their big light show, and their sound was really big and pulsing. It was definitely like very beat and percussion centered, and vocals, of course. The rest of the music and the melody was a lot more background. But I mean, everybody was singing along, and like it was just like a big, fun, like dancey kind of show. That was really cool, and it was different for me, and I'm glad I got to experience that. And it's been fun in general, like getting my mind open to other kind of things, because usually if I want to go see a live show, I'll go see something I can like headbang to. But it's been fun to see stuff that is outside of that realm. Opens my barriers a little bit. So now let's hear from my son Soren about his thoughts on Ludacris and Glass Animals. All right, I'm here with Soren, and he attended a couple concerts with us this summer. Soren, you first saw Ludacris, right? Mm-hmm. And that was your first like big show?
Yeah.
You want to tell me about how you felt about it?
It was fun, and we got ice cream.
Being your first like major concert, what was your like impression about doing something like that again?
I wanted to do it again. It was fun just being in a group of people.
Okay, so this was a hip hop show. This is Ludacris, and you knew a lot of his music going into it. But what was like your reaction to seeing him live in person? Because it's when you hear somebody recorded, it's one thing, and you're kind of in your own comfort zone, when you're listening to music. But when you're out in public, did it help that everybody was like into it, and did that vibe with you at all, or were you just kind of in your own little world?
It helped.
Now that you've been to like a big hip hop show, would you be interested in seeing more hip hop shows, or do you want to go to see more like rock concerts? How are you feeling about that?
Really, any concert.
Well, so speaking of which, so we also saw Glass Animals, mm-hmm. which is a very different kind of music, and I think a different kind of crowd too, because Ludacris seemed like it was more. I was actually surprised that there weren't more kids there. It's because of the Fast and the Furious stuff, and like that's how you introductions to him, right? Was through those movies. Yeah. I think that's a lot of your generation for sure, because he hasn't made like he's made music, but he hasn't been on like chart toppers like he was when I was younger. So I wasn't surprised that there was mostly people from my generation there, but because of like his celebrity status beyond music, I was assuming that there would be more kids, but there really wasn't as many. But on Glass Animals side, there was a lot younger crowd. I think it was a much more of like a current college crowd. Did that make any difference to you, that there were younger people?
Well, there was more people singing along.
Did you have any like different kind of enjoyment between that more like pop music with more like live instrumentation and stuff, as opposed to the DJ and the hip hop way of doing it, or was it still same live music experience for you?
It was still kind of the same.
Which one did you prefer?
Ludacris.
Why?
It was more fun. It was more like people dancing and like going crazy.
Like a good energy?
Yeah.
What about the stage setup? Like they put a lot more like a set design. Like Ludacris was just kind of like came out and like did his thing, and it was great. But like the Glass Animals was like they had the whole
and diving board.
Yeah, like the summer pool and a lot of more like aesthetics. Did that do anything for you?
It was kind of weird because the whole time he like kept on getting onto the diving board, and I thought he was gonna jump, but he didn't.
Well, I hope we can go see more concerts soon.
Me too.
Who's the next artist you'd want to see, like right off the top of your head?
He's dead.
Well, who were you thinking of?
Easy.
Oh, Eazy-E, if only. Well, they're doing that hologram thing these days. They've done like hologram like Tupac and Kurt Cobain. You never know. There could be a hologram Eazy-E coming. I don't know. Anybody alive that you'd want to see? Like if they came to town next week and we could get tickets?
Like 90s rap, like Snoop Dogg or something. Dr. Dre.
All right, well, we'll see what we can do. Thanks for coming on, Soren.
Mm-hmm.
All right, next up was a totally unexpected show. We got tickets from a friend at the last minute to a show back at that same Virginia Raceway Amphitheater, or Virginia Credit Union Live Amphitheater at the Richmond Raceway. And this was Nathaniel Rateliff, who I can't attest if I've ever actually heard his music or heard of him before. And I tried to listen to him a little bit before the show, and I honestly didn't really dig what I heard. Really outside of my realm of interest. It was very folky and I don't know, kind of like underproduced for my taste. But I gotta say, seeing him live, so I guess there's Nathaniel Rateliff, the solo artist, and then there's Nathaniel Rateliff and the Night Sweats, and that's what we saw was the Night Sweats. It was this big band kind of experience. Like it felt almost like a swing band or something like that. Like kind of like there was brass and the drums were very prominent, and both electric and acoustic guitar, and yeah, I mean, and the bass was funky, and like, man, I was impressed. Like I really didn't have any expectations for this, and I tried to listen to his stuff again after even the Night Sweat stuff, and it just, there's something about the recording, kind of like Dave Matthews Band, it didn't work for me. It didn't speak to me like the way it did live. So that was kind of cool. This summer I saw a couple live acts that really were like live acts. Like they really knew how to bring it live, and they really like, you know, separated themselves as elite performers, you know, in that live environment. I didn't know any of the music, I didn't know any of the songs, but they kept my attention the whole time. It was just really big, bombastic stuff. You know, I was, especially with how folky his music came across. Like when I look him up online, it was like surprisingly engaging and a really great like sonic experience with just all the different instrumentation, and also like how well they played off each other. They were just, you know, they seemed like they're having a good time, and the crowd really seemed to enjoy them. Again, this was a little bit of an older crowd. I didn't see any younger people there, unlike the Glass Animals show, which seemed to be a lot more of a young 20-something kind of crowd from what I could tell. I definitely felt old being there. But at this show, I felt right at home with the age range, the demographic of who attended the show. So that was a nice surprise. And even though I don't think I'll ever buy any of his albums, I'll definitely see him again live if the opportunity presents itself. But late into the summer, or early fall, you might say, this was back in September, I think, was Incubus. So I finally got to see Incubus again. So Incubus I've seen several times. My quick story with Incubus was when I first heard them, Follow the Leader, Korn's third album, Best Buy had put out a bonus disc with Follow the Leader, and it was like a curated compilation of bands that Korn was either like touring with, or they were interested in, or they were friends with, or they wanted, you know, there was up and coming acts and stuff. They were trying to get other bands out there. I thought it was a really, really cool thing for Korn to do, because they knew they were hitting it mainstream with that album, and they were very gracious to use that as a platform, not just for their success, but to try to give other bands a leg up too. So they had a song from their album Science on there, and I thought it was fine, but I never really got into it. And then and I think it was that same year that Follow the Leader came out. Korn was doing their first Family Values tours. That would have been 1998, I think, maybe 99, whatever year that first one was. That was the year that they were touring with Ice Cube and Rammstein and Limp Bizkit and Orgy, except the date that I saw them, which was Halloween that year, at the Patriot Center in DC. Ice Cube was not on that bill for some reason, wasn't available, so Incubus filled in, and they played first, and I didn't know their music, and I didn't know what to make of them, so I really didn't pay them much mind at the time. But then when Make Yourself came out, and I was starting to give them their due credit and actually like listen to them and start getting into them, I saw them at Ozfest. That must have been Ozfest 2000, and they were still touring off of Make Yourself, and you know, I thought they're pretty good, but they were on the main stage, and they had a very unique sound for like an Ozfest main stage. But then when I was like fully on board and I was fully a fan and familiar with their material, I saw them open for, or co-headline maybe, with the Deftones at, I think this was back at the Patriot Center, I believe. And this would have been one of the tours, but that Deftones was touring off of White Pony. It was them and Incubus, and I think maybe Taproot. I don't know if I even saw the opening band, but at that point, I loved Incubus, and I thought they were awesome. And then I did not see them again. For some reason, I just did not see Incubus, even though I continue to adore them and follow their career and adapt to all their changing sounds and experimental stuff. But that was one thing that my wife and I bonded on really early on, was we both were big Incubus fans, and we had tickets to them in 2020, and luckily they rescheduled that tour. And we got nervous for a second last fall that they were going to have to reschedule again or cancel, because they moved venues from an indoor venue to an outdoor venue in Raleigh, North Carolina. But it turned out to be a really nice place. It was definitely, I think they didn't sell tickets for a venue that size. It looked like the crowd seemed pretty small for that venue, but it was it must have been because they had changed at the last second and the indoor venue must have been a lot smaller. But Incubus was awesome. Like, I wasn't sure how they would be, at the age they are and the place they are in their career, where they've long since left behind things like, hard rock and nu metal. Even though they've brought back a little bit more of their rock edge in their past couple of releases, I was still not expecting, like, I don't know, them 20 years ago or anything like that, but they were like just as great. And I mean, Mike Eisinger is like just a phenomenon, like the way that he integrates sound. I mean, I think the guy is like at a Tom Morello level of creativity and experimentation with the stuff that he does. I've never seen a drummer sit perpendicular to the crowd before. The drummer is always facing the crowd from usually the back or the side of the stage, but the drummer was sitting sideways. So we were like looking at him from the side the whole time. It was just really unique. I'd never seen something like that before. And of course they have their DJ, and Brandon was just so epic. Like, I've never heard him on a recording or alive, like, phone it in. And even though it's been years, he still is like just all in with his intensity and passion and his mannerisms and stuff. You can tell he's just like really bringing it. He's not just doing it for the paycheck or whatever. And it was great. And I didn't realize until I was looking around at the merch and everything, but it was all Morning View stuff. So it was the 20th anniversary of Morning View, of course, because that came out like right around 9/11. And this was right around 9/11, 2021. So when they played the first 4 songs off of Morning View as their opening songs of their set, I was expecting them to play the whole album, but then they went on and played other stuff, and they played a great variety of stuff, but they didn't do anything pre-Make Yourself, which was, again, like I said earlier, a little bit disappointing because I would have loved to hear stuff from Science and Fungus Among Us and enjoy Incubus, but I understand. And they did play a great variety of stuff from Make Yourself and beyond, and it was just a solid show. It was so good. So there was one more concert that I went to in 2021 that I attended with a couple friends. So I brought them on for a discussion about it, and it got so involved that I'm going to put that in its own episode. So stay tuned for that. In the meantime, though, I just wanted to give some honorable mentions since I haven't done this podcast in so long, and I have gone to some shows. So even though I said earlier that I stopped kind of regularly going to shows, and when I say regularly, I mean, I went to, from high school all the way till probably about the time that I had a kid in 2011, I was going to shows at least once a month, but usually more than that. But then for the next 10 years, it was a lot more sparse. Life responsibilities and child rearing and stuff just became much more of a priority. But I still went to the occasional show. I don't specifically remember or have a comprehensive list of all of them, but these are just some of the ones that stood out through that period. So first of all, a great nostalgia show was, this had to be maybe 2016 or 17, I don't remember exactly, but it was at the National in downtown Richmond, Virginia, and it was a Fear Factory and Cold Chamber co-headlining show. And I think both Fear Factory and Cold Chamber had put out albums sometime around then, or maybe were about to. But regardless of the whole like bands breaking up and getting back together and put out albums, which is something that my friends and I discussed in an earlier podcast episode, which you can go listen to. Even back then, like 10 years ago, that was a thing that annoyed me, and it's still a thing that's happening now. But this show in particular was just so much fun. It felt like I was back in high school. It definitely hit that nostalgia thing. I understand why people are like flocking to these like Poison and Def Leppard shows or whatever. People criticize them as nostalgia tours, and I totally understand that. A lot of these bands aren't even writing new music, they're just playing the hits. But this was my like, Poison and Def Leppard show. This was the Fear Factory, seeing them playing like Shock and Lynchpin and stuff. It was just like, it was perfect. And it was so cool seeing Dino and Burton back again, and I'm really glad I got to see that one last time before they finally had a final falling out, which is like their umpteenth time, but it seems like this is the real one now. But it was just, they just sounded amazing, and it was awesome, and I don't really know what else to say, because it was just like seeing them back in like, I don't know, 1999 when they were touring for Obsolete, and I heard them play Shock or Edge Crusher for the first time, and I just lost it. And then Cold Chamber too, Dez, I don't know. Dez is, I've kind of been disillusioned with Dez since like the later Devil Driver albums, and just, I don't know, hearing him talk, and he's not the icon that I held him up as once as a teenager, but hearing them play stuff like Loco, it was actually really interesting because they played stuff from their first album and they played stuff from Dark Days. As far as I know, they didn't play anything off of Chamber Music, which is really interesting. I know Chamber Music is a messy album, but I love the sound of it. And I love the vibe of it. Dark Days I never even got when it first came out because I don't know, for some reason I was kind of over Cold Chamber at the time, but they were one of my favorite new metal bands at the time too. And when I got Dark Days later, I realized I had really missed out because that is such a solid album. I mean, to me, it's one of the best albums that I own. It's just so focused and clear, and like it gets to the point, but the songs are really tight and well written and really express something. And I just was so glad I got to see some of those songs played live. The drummer was wild. Like I was kind of like worried about him because he was so violent behind the kit. I was worried he was gonna like hurt himself. He was intense, but it was great seeing that almost original lineup. They didn't have Raina, of course, but I forgot her name, but the bass player that I got after Raina left was awesome. And I followed some of her solo stuff since. I know she was on that Roadrunners 20 anniversary compilation album back in the day. And she was awesome on that too. So that was just super fun. And it was great seeing both of those bands together. I had never got to see, I saw Fear Factory many times, but I never got to see Cold Chamber for some reason back in the day. So it was great to actually get to see them at least once before they, split up again or whatever's going on with them. So, and speaking of nostalgia, I don't know if I ever talked about it on this show specifically, but Weird Al he was like my first really big like artist that I got into, and like had to get his whole catalog. And
I celebrate the guy's entire catalog.
I think I was about 10 years old, and my brother and I discovered Weird Al through a friend, and he's just like, over the years, it's my interest has ebbed and flowed, as I've more like taken myself too seriously or more angsty as a teenager and stuff. But I never was completely like over dismissive of Weird Al as an adult. His humor and his work ethic and his cleverness and all that kind of stuff just has always stuck with me. And I can say without any embarrassment or hang-ups or anything, there's no guilty pleasure here. Weird Al is my favorite artist ever and will be. And as long as he keeps making music and keeps performing it, I'm going to keep consuming it, because the guy is a brilliant artist. He's hilarious and he's a great satirist. And I just don't have any negative thing to say about him at all. But not only was he my first like major artist that I like got into as a kid, he was like he was my entry right into rock. I wouldn't have gotten into grunge and eventually metal if it weren't for him and his Smells Like Teen Spirit parody. So I have him and him alone to thank for a huge part of like my life and the kind of things that I've experienced in my life. But not only was, he the first like recorded artist I got into, he was the first major show that my dad took my brother and me to. It would have had to been somewhere in Maryland. I think my brother and I were in like maybe 5th or 6th grade. And, my dad is a classical musician. You can listen to a podcast episode about that earlier on. And, we had gone to lots of orchestras and symphonies and ballets and operas and things like that growing up. But I hadn't been to like a proper like rock show, which Weird Al absolutely is, even with all the props and performance stuff. He's a rock and roll artist, and even with the polka, like he knows how to bring the rock. So, as a young kid, I was maybe 11 or 12, and it just blew my mind. I was so excited. And interestingly, every time I've seen Weird Al since, with the exception of once, I think I saw him one time by myself in DC sometime after college. So this would have been like 2000, maybe 2007, 2008 at the Anthem in DC, I believe. But other than that, I saw him with my dad at the Rams Head Live in Baltimore. I mean, that would have been maybe like 2008, 2009, something like that. I think he was still touring off the Straight Outta Linwood album. And it's cool because I've seen him in different kind of venues. I've seen him in like amphitheaters and more like traditional theaters, like at the Anthem, and I've seen him at like rock clubs like Rams Head. And I mean, he's just amazing in every venture, even on a small stage to a large stage, and his more minimal props and stuff that he can fit on the stage to like the bigger full on like costumes and dancers and all that kind of stuff was just always a great time. I could go on forever about Weird Al, but these are just supposed to be honorable mentions. But anyway, my brother and my dad and I saw Weird Al again in summer 2019 at the Richmond Raceway. And this time he was touring with a full orchestra. It was called the Strings Attached Tour. And it was blisteringly hot out, because I believe it was like in August of that year. But even so, it was an absolutely incredible show, and he had, full symphony orchestra playing along with all of the hits, and he played everything from old to new to The Biggest Ball of Twine in Minnesota to like Word Crimes and everything in between. And he had the costumes and all the great like little video shorts and stuff in between costume changes, and he got down on the crowd. I mean, we were all in seats, so he was he was doing like the I'm Tacky song as he was dancing through the aisles and stuff like that. And the guy's a miracle. I can't wait to see him again. I hope he keeps putting out music. Honestly, like the best part about that though was getting in to see him again, and this kind of tradition that's unintentionally been growing over the years of seeing Weird Al with my dad and or my brother. And I think my brother Dave has seen him on his own too, maybe in Buffalo several years ago. So this tradition that was started early on of Weird Al being like my first major artist to get into, and then my first show, but also with my dad and my brother, and we're still doing that all these years later. I don't know. There's something kind of special about that to me, something a little magical. Speaking of magical though, there's my other favorite artist, I would say, the one that stood the test of time, is Jonah Matranga, who was the lead singer of Far and New and Original and Gratitude, and he's had lots of projects and iterations over the years. One Line Drawing was his solo project name, which I think he's gone back to now. But and I've seen him countless times in countless different environments and venues and setups and stuff. But this one was a couple years ago. This would have been summer 2018, I believe. And he was it was the 20-year anniversary of the Far album Water and Solutions. But the band Far had broken up again, I guess, after they put out At Night That We Live album in 2010, 2009, something like that. So he was actually accompanied by a different band that I got there late. Actually, ironically, my band, After We Pray, was playing a gig across town in Richmond that same night, and we were like opening. So I played my gig, and then I rushed over to his show and caught like the last half of his show. But what he was doing was playing the entire album of Water and Solutions, plus a couple other songs, both solo and Far songs. But yeah, so he had this backup band. I forgot what they were called, but they were like a band from, I don't remember where they were from, maybe like New England or somewhere out west or something, but they had learned all of his songs, and so it was really cool getting to see him do that, but like with a different iteration. And I think if a lot of artists who would do something like that might be a little bit more under the critical gun for doing something outside of their band realm. But Jonah has always kind of ebbed and flowed and evolved and and adapted to like other people's accompaniment and stuff over the years. He's always kind of, it seems like even when he was in Far, he was always kind of a bit of a solo artist, because he did a lot of the songwriting and a lot of the instrumentation. And it seems that like he's able to kind of like bring what his passion, however he's best able to manifest it at a given time. So it doesn't need to be a certain group of people for him to bring out what he does best, which I think is not the case for some artists that I've seen, like Max Cavalera or Burton C. Bell or even like, Serge Tankin from System of a Down. Like a lot of these people, when they go solo, I feel like they're missing, Phil Anselmo, they're missing a certain spark that they have only when they collaborate with like certain bandmates that bring out their best stuff. Jonah seems like he's always at his peak, just whatever he's doing, whether he's solo or with other people. It was cool to see him play this album's worth of songs, but in this different kind of iteration. And as usual, he was really cool and gracious, and he stuck around after the show and and talked to people. It was a pretty small crowd, and it was definitely people that were more my age, or the generation of people that were into Far back in the day. But the other fun part too, and this was kind of another full circle kind of thing in that Weird Al kind of way, because the first time that I saw Jonah was after Far had broken up in the late 90s, and he played a house show in my then hometown of Pasadena, Maryland, at like somebody's living room in front of 20 people. And then after all these years later, I'm an adult, I have a child, and he needed a place to sleep, because he's still doing that. He's not on a tour bus, with a label backing, and he's just going out and playing where he can, and getting support and accommodations from whoever will give them to him. He's very, very punk rock in that way. And he's still doing it. The same way he was doing it more than 20 years ago. And I was able to accommodate him this time. I reached out to him and, said I had a spare bedroom. And it was great because, I got to actually I've talked to him many times after shows, but, that's always when there's like a line of people waiting. And this time I was able to just sit down with him and just have a personal one-on-one conversation. He restrung his guitar while we talked about life and music and politics and, all sorts of stuff and all the stuff that he likes to talk about, in public at shows too. So there wasn't any, oh, wow, Jonah's really like this, even though he presents himself like that. No, he doesn't have a stage persona, it seems. It seems like he's just genuine everywhere he goes and everything he does. And so I got to cook a meal for him in the morning and stuff. It was just, it was kind of a cool, I've never seen him as a rock star or anything, or an idol above other people, but I've, he's an inspiration and a favorite artist of mine. So it was cool to get to host him and have a very personal conversation. And you'll hear at the end of this episode, I'll play the recording of he was gracious to play a couple songs for me and my son Eddie and let me jam with him with my cajon. And that was really special. I never thought I'd get a chance to play music with one of my favorite artists of all time. The last honorable mention I want to mention is Hatebreed. I saw them back in 2018, but I saw Hatebreed way back. This would have been maybe 1999, maybe 2000, but I think it was before Primitive came out, because it was with Soulfly and they were touring on their first major release. Hatebreed was Satisfaction is the Death of Desire album. And I had it and I heard it and I liked it. And, I was kind of just getting into hardcore at that time in general. And they were the big dogs of the scene, the kind of the big underdogs of the scene, because hardcore wasn't I don't know if hardcore was ever considered mainstream, but it was definitely not as big in the turn of the century as it was, I think, a few years later, especially when metalcore kind of put hardcore on the map. And Hatebreed was obviously one of the people that evolved into a metalcore band and kind of put that whole thing into the limelight a little bit more. But yeah, anyway, so they opened for Soulfly, and it was just such a memorable show in general, because it was one of the first times I saw Soulfly, maybe the first, I don't really remember, but it was at the 930 Club in Washington, D.C., and if I remember correctly, the other bands on the bill were Neurosis, a doom metal band. I think there was one other band, but I really don't remember. I'm getting confused with other tours, so I can't remember who the other band was. But what I do remember specifically was that Neurosis, which, no offense to them as a band or genre or anything, but it's not really my thing, and it's really not something that other people were into as well, at least people from that show. The Sepultura fans and the nu metal fans and the Soulfly fans that were there definitely weren't there for Neurosis, and the hardcore fans that were there for Hatebreed were not there for Neurosis. So I felt bad. It was just a bad pairing, a bad bill. Neurosis, was really slow and doomy, and people were, it was pretty messed up, but people were yelling at them, telling them that they hated them, get off the stage kind of stuff. So the energy was just really kind of vitriolic and resentful and really tense, when Neurosis finally left the stage. And it was one of those moments, on a smaller scale, probably from something similar to the time that James Hetfield, Metallica, got burnt by pyrotechnics and they had to cut their set short, and the crowd was really rowdy, and Guns N' Roses could have come out and saved everything, but Axl, I guess, threw a fit and left before they played, and there was that famous riot at that show. I don't think it would have been anything near that at this show, but it was just people were definitely not into Neurosis and just wanted something to somebody needed to come in and save the day, and that was Hatebreed. I remember I think they would have slayed anyway, but because of the setup that they had from Neurosis, the whole place just exploded when Hatebreed came on. And the Satisfaction songs were, all of them were less than 2-minute songs, and they just blasted through them, and it was such high energy. And that was really I was getting into hardcore at the time, but that was I'm a hardcore kid. This is what I've been looking for all my rock life. So then fast forward several years later, I was at Ozfest 2004 in Camden, New Jersey, I think, pretty sure, because I was in college at the time in Philly. and Hatebreed had, put out Perseverance. I'd have to go back and look at the years of release, but they may have put out The Rise of Brutality, which I think cemented them as a metalcore band more than just a hardcore band. And they were definitely like at their peak, I would say, at that time. They weren't on the main stage, but they were on like one of the main side stages at Ozfest, and they were great. They brought exactly the kind of energy and stage presence that I would expect from them at that stage in their career. And then I didn't have the opportunity to see them again for years. So like fast forward now to, I think, like I said, it was 2018, and I'm living in Richmond, Virginia, and Hatebreed comes through, and they played at this little club called the Broadberry. I'd say is maybe half the size of 930 Club. So not tiny, but not huge. They were definitely cramped up there on stage. But for more on this show, stay tuned for the next episode of this podcast, where I talked to a friend that also went to this show and another friend who also attended the last show of 2021 that we discuss. So as was tradition in the first iteration of this Musicast podcast, I'd always like to play a song at the end that had some relation to the episode. In this case, I had talked about the night in summer 2018 when Jonah Matranga from One Line Drawing and Far spent the night at my house because he was touring through and he needed a place to stay. And he was gracious enough, like I said, to play a couple songs for me and my son the next morning and to let me jam with him with my Peruvian cajon. So I know the recording is not the best, but it is what it is. It's real, and I think Jonah would approve of that kind of realness. I know that the tambourine might not be totally on beat the whole time, but that was my, I don't know, how old was my son at that point? 7 maybe? So he was just having fun. So this song is Jonah's solo song from his One Line Drawing time called Smile, and I would highly recommend going to listen to the original anywhere you can find it, because if you haven't heard it, there's a great R2-D2 solo, because Jonah had a R2-D2 playback machine that he used to tour around with back in the day, and he included that in the song. And that's why I wanted him to play this, because Eddie, my son, knew this song as the R2-D2 song.
I got faith. It's dangerous to worry so much. Should've known better to get in your way. Oh, hey, that's something. Hey, yeah, anything I can do it. Hey, yeah, anything I can do it. Put it up on your face, hallelujah. And these fears all go by. Anything I can do to help you through it. I just love to see you smile. Now grace, I love grace, 'cause glorious to giving so much. I should've known better. I said to get in your way. Hey, that's something. Hey, yeah, anything I can do it. Ready for the robot solo? Hey, yeah, anything I can do it. We got a robot here, so we gotta be the robot. Ready? That's right on that, yeah.
There you go, bud.
Uh-huh. One more. Here it comes. Hey, yeah, anything I can do it. Hey, yeah, anything I can do it. Put it up on your
be sure to visit breathingunderwater.us. Follow me on Instagram at breathingunderwater1 and drop me a line at breathingunderwater1@gmail.com. Please note that I do not claim any ownership of any media presented in this podcast, which is only used for promotional purposes unless otherwise noted, and all views and opinions are those of the person expressing them and do not represent any other entities discussed in this podcast.